Okay, committee, we'll get started here. We're going to ask Dylan Deere to give us the overview of the Office of the Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So you should have a budget analysis before you for the Office of the Secretary of State. I'm going to move immediately, given our time constraints, to the FY 2022 analysis overview, which you can find on page 6. So the 2021 legislature approved a budget of $6.9 million, including $2 million from federal HAVA funds, that's Help America Vote Act. There were no changes to that approved amount, since there's no SGF reappropriations. The agency is requesting $6 million, including $1.6 million from HAVA. It's a decrease of almost $1 million. That's $916,000 below the approved amount. If you look at item 2, during the 2021 session, the Office of the Secretary of State requested a transfer of $924,500 from SGF to the Democracy Fund to meet state match requirements of Supplemental HAVA CARES Act funds. However, the Secretary of State was later notified that state match requirements could be met with existing resources. So it's basically in-kind contributions. Under all other adjustments, the agency is requesting an additional $7,801 off in special revenue funds in 22, and these adjustments comprise an increase of salaries and wages and contractual services expenditures with slight changes in aid to locals, but they're all pretty minor around fringe benefit adjustments. The agency is requesting 41.5 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 4.5 FTE positions below the 22 approved amount. They had been approved at 46 FTE for some time. However, they hadn't filled those positions, so this is just eliminating vacant positions. With that, I would stand for questions on 22.
Committee, any questions? Proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turning to page 8. The agency is requesting $5.6 million, including $1.2 million from HAVA funds for 23. It's a decrease of $344,000 below the 22 revised estimate. The agency is requesting expenditures of $1.6 million off of special revenue funds for the HAVA program. It's a decrease of that $353,085, and there's a couple of factors going on there. There's a decrease of $300,000 from federal HAVA Title I funds. That decrease is largely related to cybersecurity upgrades inside of the administration program related to elections. Were one-time expenditures for firewall upgrades and computer replacements totaling $50,000, and the HAVA state match requirements of $3,085 that occurred in 22 but do not recur in 23. That $3,000 was related to interest. For all other adjustments, there's an increase of $8,792 in salaries and wages expenditures, and that is related to group health insurance. And they're requesting the same number of FTE positions in 23 as in 22. And I was going to touch on a couple of performance measures, unless you have any questions about 23.
Any questions so far, Committee? Go ahead.
All right. Moving forward to page 10. You can see the ongoing attempts in the administration program to modernize the Secretary of State's office with the percent of record filing modernization digitization of record retention increasing from 20% to 50%. The percent of online store projects completed going from 20% to 65%. The percent of publications available in digital form increasing from 25% to 70% by a target of 23. And on the next page, the percent of the agency IT system upgrades going from 20% to 95%. If you turn to page 12, this is sort of related in business services to the ongoing IT upgrades in the Secretary of State's office. If you look at the percent of business formation documents filed online, you're going from 76% to 83%, and the percent of documents available for online filing going from 25 to 80% over this time period. And I'm going to touch on one in elections on page 14, and that's the percent of campaign finance reports filed electronically going from 40% to 75%. And on page 16, I'll just mention the first one, the percent of cybersecurity services for Kansas counties completed going from 50% to 100%. That was one of the targeted expenditures of HAVA funds that was announced by the Secretary of State last year, was upgrading various counties' cybersecurity infrastructure. I know I've gone through that pretty quick, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask me that. And I do have representatives of the Secretary of State's office here.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question is not on the performance measurements, but, and it may be for the Secretary of State's office. So we did a constitutional amendment, and I think it was in 2020, might have been 2019, that changed the way we took out those people, and I'll look at my own district, who were students at universities and military personnel who had not been counted, were in the census, but we had to pull them out. So we did the constitutional amendment. I think that was a cost of $600,000 to $800,000 to Secretary of State's office to do that. So we're not now doing that. Where does that show in the budget, or would that have been comparing 2020 budget?
It's probably would have been comparing the 2020 budget, so it would not appear in this document except for in some of our long-range analyses. And I am not seeing it if, well, that's not the right fund.
I'd be interested if indeed we're showing a reduction from 2020 because of that constitutional amendment.
If I could defer that question to the Secretary of State's office, I'd appreciate it.
Or I could get it later. It's not critical. I just wanted to make sure that we're showing that savings. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. All right, we have conferees from the Office of the Secretary of State. Come up, state your name.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jennifer Cook, Assistant Secretary of State. Appreciate the opportunity to present an overview of our budget. Dylan did a great job on the summary, so I'll just hit a few high points and then be happy to stand for any questions you may have. As indicated, we do not have any additional requests, new requests for the committee this year. We don't need any state matches. Our operational costs are remaining relatively flat for the agency this year. We're not experiencing any major increases in operational costs other than those that have been mentioned. With respect to election security, our HAVA funds that we mentioned, approximately $3.1 million was spent in calendar year 2021 for our HAVA election security initiative. We expect to spend about $2 million in 2022 and $1.6 million in 2023. One of the primary initiatives that we've undertaken in the past year or so is to work with our counties to add some additional layers of security to safeguard election workstations and networks that are used for accessing the statewide voter registration database. Those projects were scheduled in 2020. They were delayed due to the pandemic. They really got underway in 2021, and we are wrapping those up this year and expect to finish that project by the end of this fiscal year with some ongoing maintenance effort in FY 2023 and beyond. We've also undertaken some other additional internal security measures and some reviews as well. One of the initiatives we're also looking at is providing some enhanced training for county clerks. That is getting underway in this fiscal year and will be expected to be ongoing at least in the next few fiscal years as well. Dylan mentioned that we are working to modernize the agency. That is an ongoing effort. We are making very good progress in moving off of the AS400, which I think the Secretary has mentioned in prior testimony to this committee. We have completed our first program or about to complete our first program moving off of the AS400, and we will begin working on our other, moving off our other business filings from the AS400 this year. We have also been working aggressively to try and encourage more online business filings, particularly with respect to our annual reports. So that is an effort that we are continuing to work on, and we'll do that in the coming years as we move off that system. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand with any questions the committee may have.
Committee, questions? Senator Hawk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you have an answer to that question, or could you even just send that to me about what the difference was in terms of not having to make that adjustment in terms of the census data?
Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to provide that information to the committee.
Okay, thank
Absolutely.
you.
I do have a question. On the FTEs, there's been open positions for quite some time. Can you give me an idea of, the real need to keep them open, or can we just eliminate them?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So we requested 41.5, I believe, FTEs. We were at 45, 46. Those positions had been open for some time. When we came into the administration a few years ago, we left those positions open so we could assess what our needs were. In the agency, we have found that those positions really, we don't need those. We are able to operate fully with the requests that we have in the budget. And we feel like that's an appropriate balance for the agency. I will say we have been working over the last year. We have had some staff turnover. We have been working to fill those. So that has been a challenge, but we are getting fully staffed. And I think we're able to operate where we need to be with the requests that we have.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For being here today. Committee, we'll close the hearing on the Secretary of State. Okay, we're gonna a little rusty from last year. Committee. Attentions. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the FY 22 and 23 budget for the Office of the Secretary of State.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to pass the budget out. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, that's official. All right, next we'll move on to the Office of Attorney General. Mr. Wu, will you give us that overview?
Sure thing. Good morning, committee. My name is Stephen Wu, Senior Fiscal Analyst with Legislative Research. Want to recognize that the Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, is with us in the audience today. I'm going to defer a lot of the questions and testimony on agency operations to him. I'll cover the year-to-year changes in the budget instead. We'll start on fiscal year 22, which you can find in the budget analysis on page 6. So for fiscal year 22, you'll see that the legislature last year approved a budget of about $26.6 million and 175.3 FTE positions. Since the legislature adjourned, there was one adjustment to this. There was about $747,000 in unspent SGF that was reappropriated into fiscal year 22. So the agency began their 22 budget request with that amount. Now, as far as the agency request is concerned, there is a request for $31.3 million and 177.4 FTE positions. This is about $3.9 million higher than the amount approved by the legislature. And this is due to a number of changes. If we just go line by line down the numbers in the table up top, you'll see that there's some unspent funds in the Office of the Inspector General. So the budget for the AG's office was reduced by about $242,000. There is a slight decrease for fringe benefit adjustments. This is the result of the $500 million in bonds for capers. Employer contributions dropped slightly. Number 4 is the agency supplemental request. The agency is requesting a little over $43,000 and 2 additional FTE positions to create some new auditors within the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General. The agency indicates that this would dramatically increase the number of audits they are able to perform, and it would also allow for the ability to preserve continuity of audits in case one position becomes vacant. You'll see an increase of about $3.6 million for additional distributions from opioid settlement funds. About 75% of this goes to the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund, and about 25% of this goes to the Municipalities Fight Addiction Fund. Both of these funds are meant to provide funding for projects and activities that treat, prevent, reduce, or mitigate substance abuse and addiction at the state and local levels respectively. There's a slight increase in distributions of federal grants received by the Medicaid Fraud and Abuse Division within the office, as well as an increase in dollars for operating costs related to the concealed carry licensing unit. This is mostly for contractual services for expenses related to litigation. And lastly, you'll see a slight decrease for a variety of other adjustments. Now, for the governor's recommendation, the governor only has one change in her recommendation, and that is to not recommend the adoption of the supplemental request for those auditor positions within the Medicaid Inspector General. This totals the governor's recommendation at 31.2 million and 175.4 FTE positions. At this time, would be happy to answer questions on 22 or to move on to 23.
Committee questions on 22? Senator Hawk.
I'm wondering how we can hire 2 positions for $43,000. It would look like those are $20,000 jobs. Does not sound like a full-time job.
My understanding is
Benefits, but I can leave that for the Attorney General's testimony.
yeah, I'll defer the full answer to the agency, but my understanding is that it would be part of the funds for those positions would come from the funds that the agency already has.
Okay, so that's just additional too. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, seeing none other, proceed.
The analysis for fiscal year 23 begins on page 10. The agency for this year requests 26.9 million and 177.4 FTE positions. This is a pretty big decrease over the previous year, about 4.4 million. The decrease is primarily due to a number of items that were requested in 22 that don't reoccur for 23, as well as for changes in distributions in funds at the federal level. The one addition is the enhancement for new auditor positions, same thing as in the previous year. The agency is just requesting additional funds for 23. You'll see that detailed in number 1. As far as the other decreases, you'll see decreases in opioid settlement distributions. That's because these funds are primarily distributed in 22, so they don't reoccur for 23. Accordingly, you'll see a drop in 23. Same thing with the scrap metal theft reduction fund. The last payment went out goes out in 22, so if they don't occur in 23, you'll see a decrease in 23. And the same thing down the line for expenditures within Solicitor's Division, as well as within the Medicaid fraud control funds, as well as with expenditures within expenditures for litigation costs within the agency. For 23, the governor doesn't recommend any changes and concurs with the agency's request, so it totals about 26.9 million and 177.4 FTE positions. At this point, I'd be happy to answer questions on fiscal year 23.
Any questions at this point? Senator Hawk.
So to understand, and I guess the Attorney General will probably speak to this when he talks, but essentially the governor is saying don't hire the new auditor positions till the 23 budget.
Yes, that's what it appears to be.
And then secondly, and I'll probably leave this for the Attorney General also, give him a heads up, the opioid settlement money, I thought we might be getting some more of that money year after year after year like some of the other settlements, and it looks like that's not the case this year.
I think I'll defer answer to that to the AG.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Seeing none, go ahead.
Okay, that concludes the bulk of my remarks. Just for some context, you'll see some additional details on program level analysis from page 12 to the end of the document. This details the expenditures at the program level as well as the history of expenditures for those programs. There's also some detail on performance measures within those various programs. Given the volume of programs within the Office of the Attorney General, I think I'm just going to conclude my remarks here unless the committee would like to hear specific analysis on a program.
Committee, any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Wu.
Thank you.
Conferees, come forward. Welcome, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We support the governor's budget recommendation with one suggested modification related to opioids. And I would characterize the budget recommendation as a current services budget with one exception, and that is the Medicaid Inspector General auditors. So I plan to talk about those two things, and then, of course, anything else the committee wants to. With respect to the auditors, here's what's going on. You'll recall that way back, it was either 2005 or 2006, this legislature created the position of the Office of Medicaid Inspector General. It was something of a nomad for well over a decade. It was originally attached to the Health Policy Authority, and then it got moved to KDH&E, and then it specifically got attached to the Medicaid program at KDH&E, and I can't remember all that, but it moved around a lot. While that happened, the leadership was not consistent in that office. It was open for a while, and then it had a quick succession of inspectors general. And ultimately, I think it's fair to say it was fairly dormant, just sort of parked there, not doing much. At that point, the legislature decided to move it over to the AG's office, attach it to us. It's under our umbrella. It submits to our budget, although the Inspector General, of course, is an independently Senate-confirmed position. And so we have a sort of like the KBI director. We have a relationship with them. It's very close, but on the other hand, they do have a certain independence. And told us to fix it. And so we've been doing that now for, I think it's 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, I can't remember, that we've had the program. I'd have to double check the year. We essentially had to rebuild it from the ground up. And the legislative decision when it was sent to us was to appropriate $400,000 a year for that program, knowing that ultimately when we get the thing stabilized and functioning, we'd have to revisit whether that's a right number or a wrong number. It was somewhat arbitrary. So we did that. We had a little bit of a setback from our vantage point, probably good for the state, certainly good for the individual, but our first Inspector General we hired then got stolen away by the Medicaid program. She's now the Medicaid director, which caused us to then go out and find another Inspector General. Anyway, we've done all that. So we now have Steve Anderson, Senate confirmed. He's serving as Inspector General. Steve's been there for a couple of years, and he is in the process of right-sizing the program. And knock on wood, as far as I know, he's going to be there for a good bit. And he has requested this year 2 additional auditors. He thinks that going up the 2 bodies is more appropriate to the scope of the work they're supposed to do. So that's the origin of the 2. I agree with him, and so we passed it on in our budget request. The governor's approved it as well. 2 points on that regarding the money. Number one, about the $43,000, you're exactly right, Senator. We originally requested, I think it was a quarter year's appropriation for the current fiscal year, the theory being as soon as you pass the budget, we'll start the process of hiring the 2 new auditors. The governor recommended no money this year. Instead, just start with a full year, July 1. That's fine. We'll start whenever we want to start. Whenever if you choose to fund it, whenever you choose to fund it, that's when we'll start going out and hiring somebody. Just have a little delay, not a big deal. The other issue is just the cost of the program. I would say because we've had openings in the program, we went through the 2 IGs, we've accumulated some balance in that fund. And our intention was, when Steve approached me and said, I'd like to have the 2 additional auditors, our intention was we can actually pay for that for at least a year, maybe 2, with the money we already have. Just keep it in the fund and let us pay for these 2. You have to pay for them in the out years. I don't want to mislead, but we can get this up and going for a couple of years. For whatever reason, the mechanics of the way this was done this year in the governor's budget, instead of just reappropriating the money that's already there to us and letting us do that, they lapsed the money. And then they propose a new appropriation for the cost. So, I mean, I think it's a net wash bottom line, but that's why it looks like we're asking for new money this year. It's actually money that's already in the pot. They just have us giving it back to them, and then they give it back to us. So that's the Medicaid IG piece. I don't think I misstated any of that. With respect to the opioid piece, this is the one area I would suggest the committee at least consider making a modification to the governor's budget, and it's only because of the timing, and it's really just, I think, an honesty and accounting issue. At the time, Senator Hawk's exactly right. We anticipated and continue to anticipate receiving additional money from the opioid settlements as they come in. Somewhat unpredictable exactly when that all happens. And so at the time we submitted our budget and when the governor built her budget based on our submission, we only banked on for 22 and into 23 receiving the settlement proceeds we already knew were coming in. That was a single settlement for the consulting firm McKinsey & Company that got us, we talked about that last year in the committee. It was $3.9 million the first year, and then I think it's $250,000 a year in the out years for a total of 5 years, if I remember right. That's close to correct. If you know what the details, will confirm them. And that 3.9 million is built into the budget sheets you have. That's why our budget goes up significantly to 31 million and something, because it accounts for that additional expenditure. Because the way the statute reads, these grant funds that we administer, they flow through our budget. So the more we collect, the more we administer, the bigger our budget's going to get. That was the best information we had until the budget process was pretty much done and the budget was submitted. I can now tell you, and it's reflected, the numbers are reflected in my written testimony. We have reached a settlement agreement with the 3 distributors in Johnson & Johnson. That's been public for some time. But that agreement was contingent upon a condition subsequent that we, not only us, but other states as well, had to reach certain critical mass in participation of our cities and counties in order for the companies to say, yes, we're going to do this deal. We have done that, both in Kansas, and we are confident a sufficient number of states around this country have done. The deal's going to go through. So we now know, based on that, that we will be receiving additional recoveries in the current fiscal year 22 and in 23. The numbers are in my testimony. I think it's about $7.5 million additional we expect yet this year, and about $34.3 million next year. So that money by statute will flow through both the Municipalities Fight Addiction Fund and the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund, both of which are administered through our office in partnership with the Sunflower Foundation. And all those words are by way of saying, because we now know we're getting that additional money in the current year and next year, to be honest, in budgeting, you probably ought to raise the amount you expect us to spend out of those funds by $7.5 million in the current year, and by 34.3, whatever the numbers are in the testimony, next year. There are no limit funds, and the statute requires us to send the money out in grants, so we will do it. But if you want to honestly reflect what we expect to do, it's going to be a whole lot more than what's baked into the budget. So, and with that, I'd be glad to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions, Senator Hawk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Smith. That's kind of good news that we actually are looking to get the money. So you're saying we need to raise the amount in your budget in 22, $7.5 million on the settlement funds?
Correct.
And then 34.3 million in 2023?
Correct.
So that will make that go up significantly. And then we've had kind of interesting discussions in Ways and Means about K-Trax, and I think we put funding of, at least partial funding of that in there, and I assume that money will then be there to transfer into K-Trax as we had intended last year.
That's correct, Senator. It'll transfer in the manner that you wrote into last year's budget bill. Is that $200,000 a year? $200,000 a year comes off the top of the recovery, goes to K-Trax, and then the balance flows through these 2 funds in the grant programs.
Certainly help solve another problem. So
We're glad to help, Senator, glad to help.
and I have another question, but I'll wait till after the opioid thing. It's on a different issue. Thank you.
Senator Clays?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just turning our attention over to some of the performance measures. On page 21, looking at the concealed carry licenses issued and renewals issued, can you give us the amount of revenue brought into the agency based on these numbers and your target amount of revenue in 23 probably would be more helpful as a number. And then also, can you give us an idea of efforts to simplify the renewal process? Multi-part question. Enjoy.
Sure. Senator, on the numbers question, I'm going to defer to our smart people that know numbers, so I'm going to turn around to them in a minute and they can answer that part of the question. With respect to the simplification piece, believe me, we are always open to suggestion on how to make it simpler. There is a structural, sort of reality that starts at the original application where you do part of it locally and then it comes to us. So it becomes, this multi-stage process. But if you got a suggestion on how we can improve that for renewals, I'm all ears. We would be delighted to take a look at that.
I'd appreciate it before Ways and Means meets.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you. On another topic, I was on the modernization of mental health, and we're launching that 988 suicide prevention number. And I know you have a budget item, which is the social media suicide prevention. And when we talk about that, we always talk about, would it make more sense to sort of combine those efforts over at KDADS instead of having them in two different agencies? Have you looked into, and I think we did have a personnel change, so I
Right.
wonder if that's being thought about, where we might have, I was assured that we really do have good coordination going between the AG's office and that program and 988 plans, but is that something you've looked into, and would that potentially be a cost savings in our budget?
Yeah, Senator, I don't know that it would be a cost savings. Obviously, we can structure the work we do on suicide prevention and the work that KDADS or other agencies do on it in any way the legislature wants us to structure it. So I start with that threshold proposition. The specific role we have by statute, it's not only social media issues, it's youth suicide prevention. It's targeting behaviors and conditions that lead to suicides among kids. And the reason that was given to us, that we were advocates for it early on. It was kind of back at a time KDADS was perhaps not as active as they may be at this point. But the reason we were engaged on that is the State Child Death Review Board is attached to us. And so we had been following those youth suicide trends for some time. And we're very troubled by the line, which was pretty consistently up, not sharply up, but steadily up over the prior decade. So we came over, did a task force, and then came over and asked for help with implementing their recommendations. One of those was to let us hire a person to coordinate the different recommendations that are written into statute and to work with other agencies, private sector entities, and others who are interested in the subject. And we've been doing that. You're correct. We recently lost our coordinator. She went on to other pastures. I don't know if they're greener pastures, but other pastures. And we're in the process of kind of refilling that. I mean, I do think it makes sense for the Attorney General's office to have a dedicated focus on youth suicide prevention because of the work we do on child deaths. That's obviously a policy choice. You can do with it as you think makes sense. I think the key to that is the coordination. And I would share the view, I'm glad to hear you were assured, I think the coordination has been good. This is an area where everybody sort of agrees on what we are trying to do, and there's a lot of good faith in trying to figure out how we advance the ball. So that's a long way of saying, if you want us to keep doing it, we will. And I think it makes sense for us to, on the youth piece in particular, to make sure that doesn't just get rolled up into the broader suicide prevention efforts. There are some dynamics unique to youth. If, on the other hand, that's not where the legislature wants to be, we'll do what the law tells us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would say, though, if you, I'm not advocating this, I think the status quo is pretty good, but if you decide not to have us have a person doing the youth suicide prevention work, then you probably ought to look at the substantive law that tasks us with several specific things to do, because without a person to do them, it's going to be a bit challenging to meet the requirements of the law.
And I forgot how much is allocated to that program. I was thinking it was $3 million, but that sounds kind of.
Oh, no.
I think it's that.
I think it's the price of a body, isn't it? In fact, it might even be a halftime body. I'm not sure about that part.
It's not a huge budget item, and I didn't see it in the budget here, so.
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions or any other questions for the other conferees? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For
Thank
being
you,
here.
committee. Appreciate it.
Committee, what's your pleasure?
I'm prepared to make the motion. I always like the vice chair doing that because he's very thorough, but I leave that to the chairman's discretion. I'll probably go with the governor's recommendation, but.
You may make your motion.
Well, I move we approve the Attorney General's budget and comply with the governor's recommendations that the Attorney General agreed to in his comments. And I would also like us to increase the opioid portions as he designated, the $7.5 million in 2022 and the $34.3 million in 2023.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, committee, we'll have Senator return here very shortly, but we'll go ahead and have the budget heard from Mr. DeBoer. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Committee. My name is Martin DeBoer. I'm with Legislative Research. I'll be going over the Kansas Insurance Department budget analysis. The Insurance Commissioner is here with us today to answer any questions you may have. Similar to all the other budgets you've seen, the first 3 pages are a general overview of the agency with a budget overview on the front, followed by some highlights and fund numbers. I would like to begin on page 8 with the fiscal year 2022 analysis. Top of the page, you'll see the table with the legislative approved amount at the top, followed by the agency's revised estimate, and then the governor's recommendation at the bottom of the table. So there were no changes made to the legislative approved amount by the legislator. Agency estimates right there in the middle of the page. We have a revised estimate of $37.5 million from all funds. This is an increase of $2.8 million, or 7.9% above the FY22 approved amount. These include federal funding. The agency was awarded a total of $675,586 from the State Flexibility and Stabilize the Market Cycle 2 grant. This is a federal grant. And these funds will be split between FY22 and 23. So you'll see half of that applied to their 22 requests and half in their 23. Below that, you have a catch-all of all other adjustments. So you'll see increased expenditures in their salaries and wages of $186,000, contractual services of $2.4 million, their commodities of $1,750, capital outlay. And those contractual services are primarily due to expenditures for accountants, auditors, and to assist with regulation of the insurance companies. The commodity increase is primarily due to expenditures for office supplies and upkeep. Capital outlay is primarily due to expenditures for technology upgrades and their computer replacements, which are on a 3 to 4 year cycle. The agency does request 135.5 FTE positions, and this is 0.5 FTE positions below their 22 approved number. On the following page, top of page 9, you'll see the governor's recommendation. So the governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate, but the governor does recommend that the Securities Act fee fund be made a no limit fund. And the governor does recommend 135.5 FTE positions, which is the same as the 22 revised estimate. And with that, I'll stand for questions for fiscal year 22.
Questions on 22? Seeing none, proceed.
Thank you. If you could turn the page, we're looking at page 11. At the top of the page, you'll see the table similar to FY22. We begin with the FY22 revised estimate and the agency changes, and then the governor's recommendation. So the agency is requesting expenditures of $37.1 million, and this is from all funds, and a decrease of $437,973 below the FY22 revised estimate. These include the federal funds. Here you'll see the second half of that grant that they were awarded in FY22. So, and then we'll have all of their adjustment, a decrease, and these are expenditures on contractual services for training and accountants. And so the correlation there is they're hoping to fill FTE positions in FY22, so those expenditures drop off in FY23. The agency requests 135 FTE positions, which is the same number as the 22 revised number. At the bottom of the page, you'll see the governor's recommendation. The governor concurs, and again notes that the Securities Act fee fund should be made a no-limit fund. Bottom page, 135.5 FTE positions as the agency's request. With that, I'll stand for questions on FY23.
Questions on 23? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to committee. I see you brought your key person and some publicity people.
No publicity, no. Well, Mr. Chairman and Senator Clays, it is a pleasure to be here today. I do want to thank you before we get started for the work that you do in putting a budget together. Having served on Senate Ways and Means, it's quite a process, and I appreciate the time that you're devoting to it. I remember these meetings very well. I was going to say fondly, but I think I'll just stick with I remember them well. We are pleased to be here today. I want to introduce you to a couple of key staff that are here with me today. Bobby Mariani is Director of Administration and Human Resources. Charlotte Daubert is our Comptroller, and Mandy Rowe is the Chief of Staff. And they are truly the subject experts. We appreciate your approval of our submitted budget, and we are absolutely happy to answer any questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bobby. But thank you again.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's good to be back here again for a little bit. I do appreciate you giving us the opportunity to provide information this morning on our budget. We do try to look for efficiencies and priorities that best serve the citizens of Kansas. Martin talked about the numbers, so I just want to go over some highlights of activities and priorities for our agency.
For our online folks, would you just identify yourself?
I'm Bobby Mariani with the Kansas Insurance Department.
Thank you.
The department is currently recruiting for vacant positions that were funded in our FY 22 and 23 budget. Like many organizations, recruitment right now has become increasingly difficult, especially for our very technical positions. That is why you'll see an increase in salaries and wages. We've got some vacancies out there we're trying to fill. And we did last year hire finally a chief examiner for our agency, which is a very technical position, requires a certified financial examiner designation or a CPA. Some department highlights. We have received accreditation from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners for the next 5 years. Very significant accomplishment for us with no significant findings. That's why we're able to be accredited for the next 5 years as opposed to having to update them each year. So for us, that's a very significant accomplishment. Yes.
If I may, at this point, what was the policy for changing out technology upgrades or computer equipment and so forth prior to your reign?
I'm not sure prior to our reign what it was. I know right now we do it every 3 to 4 years. We did move that up a tiny bit during COVID in order to make all of our staff capable of working from home when we had to do that.
Is that where most of it originated from? So it's out of office equipment? You know, I know technology changes occur pretty rapid, but I'm just wondering, is 3 to 4 year replacement of your technology?
That's for our desktops. So we have, the last 3 to 4 years, we have moved from desktop computers to laptop computers so that all of our staff have the ability to take their laptops to meetings and again during COVID so that they could all work from home if when that's necessary.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's fine.
Yes.
And I just wanted to add that, you know, the laptops that, when we first came into office, I don't think that laptops were as powerful as they are now, and which is why we remained with our desktops in the office. But the laptops have become so much more powerful. And but you're right, 3 to 4 years might be a little outdated as to how often we need to replace them. But so far, that schedule has worked for us, and they're much better. And I think our staff is much happier.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay. The department also successfully implemented the statutory changes to the producer licensing process. If you'll recall Senate Bill 37 from last year, we implemented phase 1 in June of 2021, and phase 2 we just implemented in January of 2022. It was a momentous project to complete. Our staff put significant effort to assure it was done timely and successfully. We do appreciate your support of that bill. We were able to get some efficiencies out of there. We've eliminated outdated paper processes and using more user-friendly online processes. We're going to save about $25,000 a year in postage, and we also do anticipate that our revenue will be reduced by a minimum of $5 million, perhaps up to $8 million a year because of the changes we did in the appointment process, and that'll create savings for the insurance industry. We also have made great strides in addressing items due to the Bloomer settlement, the settlement of the Bloomer Securities Fee Fund case, and the transfer of those funds to the State General Fund. We have contracted with a business analyst to make some recommendations on our registration process. We also developed rate setting tools so that we'll be able to right size our rates in the future. We are in the process of contracting with services to go out and survey and do focus meetings with our constituents in the securities industry so that we can make sure we're providing the services that they want and need in addition to our statutory requirements. And we also are working on some other strategies to make sure that we're doing, meeting the requirements of that settlement agreement. As far as fiscal matters, again, the governor recommended our request in both fiscal years. We'd appreciate your support of that as well. As previously noted, there is an increase in contractual services. Part of this is due to the additional funds that we needed to meet those requirements of the Bloomer settlement. So the State Finance Council did increase our budget by $750,000 to assure we could do those items listed above. Part of our increase in contractual services is that federal grant that Martin mentioned. Also, because we realize that our insurance regulation fee fund does have a healthy balance out there. Again, I think we spoke to this last year. We are waiting to see what the impact of Senate Bill 37 is on our fee fund because we know that it will decrease our revenue, again, by a minimum of $5 million, maybe as much as $8 million. And so we just finished implementing that in January. We hope to see a full year's worth of what that actually does to our budget and how that affects our fee fund. And then also, currently there is a proviso in our budget that will eliminate the transfer to the State General Fund from the Securities Act Fee Fund, which was the topic of the Bloomer case. There are two substantive bills out there, Senate Bill 392 and House Bill 2447. They've been introduced to eliminate it permanently because, as you know, proviso only lasts 1 year. And with that, we'd appreciate your support of our budget, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee, Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my apologies, Commissioner. Page pictures, I remember we always got those during transportation. So anyway, I know you understand. Quick question on how much was that Bloomer settlement per year that we had been transferring from Securities Fund into State General Fund?
Traditionally, it had been about 12 to 13 million that we transferred. This year, if we were to do it, it's only 5.1 million because also part of the settlement agreement was for us to put a moratorium on fees for a couple of years while we tried to figure out what was the right amount of services and fees that we should charge. So right now, there's only 5.1 million in the fund.
And then what does that leave the Securities Fund yearly budget to be now after this settlement?
Traditionally, it's been a little over 3 million operational expenses.
And then we still may have some big national settlements that may dump a significant amount of money into the securities budget. Is that right?
I don't believe there are any national settlements for that fee fund.
Had we been getting some national types that had not? Okay. I thought that was sort of where some of that large amount of money. So it was mainly just fees.
Yes.
And we've reduced those fees. Will we pick those fees back up
Well,
sometime in the future?
that's why we're contracting for services to do a rate-setting tool, find out what services we might not be doing that our constituents would like for us to do. So yes.
Thanks for explaining. I think I understand that a little better now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for being here. Any other questions? All right, that concludes our hearing. What's the flavor of the committee? Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the FY '22 and '23 budget for the Kansas Insurance Department.
We have a second. We got a motion to move 22 and 23 out favorably. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. All right, committee, that concludes our work today. Thank you.